have the terrible question of appearances, have the doubts, the uncertainties after all.
Is a talented singer, performer, and a lawyer?
Yes.
Okay, well there you go. And you're single?
No.
Oh.
Sorry.
And we're talking about Walt Whitman.
Walt Whitman, yes.
And
Not
he was
Walter
a
White.
poet.
Not Meg Whitman.
He was an openly gay poet, correct?
Of all the romantic correspondence, there is not one romantic correspondence with a woman. It's all with men.
Okay.
He published the first edition of Leaves of Grass in 1855.
Okay.
There was actually a review that came out. Aside from describing it as the work of a sentimental donkey, this was a negative review. At the end of this review, he writes, and this book clearly references the sin that's not mentioned among Christians, which you know what that is. And it's good.
Having fun and feeling good.
Exactly.
Dancing.
So the poetry he was writing and the vision that he was putting out there definitely was coming across as queer to the folks of his time, for good and for ill.
Right.
I think probably the poems of most folks that have read in school would have been some of Whitman's like patriotic poems, which are not some of my favorite poems actually. But I mean, in a way, the kind of patriotic poems he wrote, maybe that was the kind of like the protective shell that kind of sustained his poems into the future. But queer people have connected to Whitman's poetry since he was writing it.
Yes, they have.
And up to the present. The entire book of Leaves of Grass is hundreds of poems. But I've set 50 of them so far. But I've been working on it for 8 years.
8 years, wow. And I was reading that the Leaves of Grass at the time was a very visceral, very emotional poem as opposed to being sort of a literary poem. Is that what is it about it?
Absolutely. And I think that if you look at the poetry being published around the time that Whitman published Leaves of Grass, and even if you look at some of Whitman's poetry from the 1840s, it's very metered, it's rhyming, it's these very particular forms. Whitman's book kind of drops out of nowhere. And it's kind of an entirely new way of writing poetry and writing prose, too. There's a prologue to the very first edition, and it's unlike anything that was out at the time.
What initially attracted his stuff to you?
8 years ago, I read Leaves of Grass just front to back during a break I had from school, and I just really connected to it right away. And I think a couple of things really connected to. One was just the way that Whitman is clearly like reaching forward and reaching to queer people in the future. I just hadn't really had that experience with an author before. And I think too, just the way that he writes and talks about queer community, queer history, are very powerful. And I think it's just really important for queer people to know that one of the most extraordinary poets in the English language was a queer person. And aside from that, the vision that they put forth in their poetry, the beauty of their poetry is a queer vision.
Yes.
And so this idea that queer people make art, queer people create very valuable, important art.
Yes.
And folks should know, and queer people can take a lot of power from that.
I agree completely.
Yeah, and I wonder how that would be different today, because I think being queer then, being queer today is different.
Absolutely.
And me as somebody who's sort of in the middle, is I don't equate the queer aspect to being your sexual preference. It's more about your expression of your archetypes. The male warrior, the female goddess. Everybody can be both, and that's,
I totally agree, and I think that really, like, the queer vision in Whitman's work is this idea of just welcomingness, that there could be a world that has room for everybody, and I think that is a queer vision.
And I think we'll all be better for it. I mean, in the end, I think most people are queer. Because most
exactly.
People, there are some women who want to be a warrior, and there's some warriors who want to be a goddess. And they're just afraid.
Exactly, yes.
Now, do you have a background in music?
I do. Well, I grew up playing piano.
Okay.
And I went to music camp, which is what gay children do.
Band nerd. I was a band nerd myself.
They would have to force us all to play sports once a week, and all of us would be like, "No, I want to
so
play."
So you get your
oboe.
exercise. So what inspired you to put the whole poem to music?
Well, I had done some composing when I was growing up, but I hadn't done it for a really long time. When I read Leaves of Grass, and when I read it, I felt that really strong connection to it. I was like, I want to try setting some of this to music, and so I tried lots of different ways of doing it, music and like voice and piano, or a choral piece, and they were all kind of terrible.
Okay.
And then just kind of developed my musical vocabulary over time. It's kind of something that I
do
and work on every day.
Turn the whole thing into one long.
I think it actually
like a day-long adventure with you. You could just.
Well, they said the entire Leaves of Grass to music would be
a lifetime.
Yeah, I think I'd have to live a couple hundred years. I've set the first chapter entirely, and I've set this 12-poem set he published in 1859 that is like probably the queerest poems in the whole work. And right now I'm working on this 45-poem set. I'm 20 poems in.
Okay.
And it's called the Calamus poems.
Okay.
And the calamus plant was kind of Whitman's symbol of gay love. Setting those poems to music would be, that's my goal right now.
I also think it's really important to bring Whitman's work to light. People don't necessarily know who these people are, and in order for them to get a lift up, and I would tell you what I would do is go to some of these shows that go on, these drag shows and this, that, and the other, that have performances, and go on and perform in front of them and start the conversation going about Whitman and bring him back to the forefront, because I think he still has something valid to say today.
I totally agree.
And you're going to sing for us tonight.
Absolutely.
We're super excited.
That may be identity beyond the grave is a beautiful fable only. Maybe the thing